Hello everyone, you're welcome to Programme 4 of Hidden Kinvara. Here we are at the old National School in Kinvara. Now it's a very historical school. It was built in 1840 and opened in 1841. Now what's interesting about it was that it's probably the first, maybe the first national school built under the 1831 Education Act in Ireland. And it replaced what existed before it, which was the head schools. And there were quite a number of head schools around Kinvara and Duras and places like that, all of them being run by private operators. Now those schools were very good. They taught mathematics and they taught Irish, and some of them taught Greek and Latin and so on. And they taught very often mathematics to a very high standard. The problem was that the British government was anxious in 1831 and then when the school was built in 1840 to accustom the population here and indeed all over the country to being part of the British Empire. They wanted to acquaint people with not only the language but also the history and the customs of the British Empire, and they knew that this wasn't being done in the head schools. So a decision was taken to build this national school system. Now it also suited the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church was also a bit worried about the kind of teaching that went on in the head schools, that they couldn't insist on religion being taught, or they couldn't insist on the kind of religion being taught. And so they were happy enough to go along with this experiment of the national school system. We can see here from the plaque, this plaque was put up here a short time after the school was opened, Kinvara National Schools, 1840. Now one of the interesting things about this school was that it was co-ed, that boys and girls attended class here. And we have a record of the first teacher. He was a Mr. Brennan. And we get a great idea of the curriculum. Now the curriculum taught mathematics, mensuration as it was called, algebra. It taught mainly, however, and some geography, but it taught mainly English. And it taught English in a very, I suppose, intense way, in that students were examined in it on the basis of reading, of penmanship, of spelling, of grammar, of comprehension. Now, as I said, the purpose of all of that was to accustom young people here to being citizens of the British Empire. The English government wanted citizens of the British Empire. The religious education was given outside the school system because the British government wasn't a bit interested in it, but the Catholic Church was interested in it. And what happened over time was that the patronage of the school, the patron of the school, eventually became the parish priest. And as a result, the school taught religion within the curriculum. Now girls, the only difference between the education of the boys and girls in the school was that girls did sewing and knitting as well. And one of the very interesting things that I never knew when I was a student here was that the boys learned agricultural science. Now, agricultural science was taught by Mr. Brennan's son. It wasn't taught in the school until about 1856 and was taught for a period of 20 years, which is just after the famine, or when the effects of the famine had receded. And according to information elicited by Michael Sullivan from our archives, the way it worked was that it was very practical, that the school was given permission to rent 5 acres of arable land adjacent to the school and 7 acres of pasture land. Now I think that the arable land was around here, from this area here and the house next door, right up to the arable fields across the roadway from that leads down to the sewage treatment plant. The pasture land, I think, may have been across the road, because it had to be close to the school, because the same teacher who taught all the other subjects in the school taught that as well. And the agricultural science program in the school, Kinvara is called a model school, and there was only 2 of them in South Galway. The other was up in Shanaglis. And the purpose of the model school was to teach the kids of 3rd and 4th and 5th class farm management. And it was extraordinary the number of crops that they grew with regard to this, you know, from turnips and mangels and potatoes and peas and beans, and you know, there's a list of about 12 different things on the arable land. And then on the pasture land they were given cattle and sheep to rear. So they were given this as a once-off grant, and then each year the farm had to make a profit to keep itself in existence, so that the kids actually learned hands-on all of those skills. And Michael Sullivan, in his article, is very interesting in his comments on it. He said that the inspectors inspected the school very frequently, and their comments are now available in the school, in the St. Joseph's School archives. And they made comments like, you know, that you have to keep the walls built, you have to keep the bushes cut back, you have to avoid weeds spreading from one part to another. And he finished up by saying things that are as valid today as they were at that particular point. Now, I was a student here from, I think, 1954 to 1958. And the actual school itself probably hadn't changed a great deal since that time. But in 1872, Maura Mungan told me that girls were no longer students in the school. And I'm always intrigued by that, because they couldn't have moved into St. Joseph's Convent because it didn't exist. That St. Joseph's Convent School and church wasn't built until 1878. So I'd be interested to know if anybody has any information about where the girls went to school after 1862. But when I was a student here, as I said, the fabric of the school was the same. There was a shed here where the stone building is behind us, which held coal. And the procedure every morning, the first thing every morning in the winter, was that those of us who were in the senior classes went out to collect what we call kippins, kippini. And we went over the wall here, over to the churchyard, where there were a whole lot of trees, and we picked up the kippins from the ground under the trees and brought them back. And then we rolled paper into balls and put them in with the kippins, and then put a couple of bits of briquette or turf in and lit the fire. And once it was going, then there was somebody in charge of getting coal dust and putting water on it and putting it in on top of the whole lot. We used to call it slack. I don't know if there's another name for it. And it gave off great heat. So in the course of the day, if you were cold in the classroom, what you had to do is ask for permission to go up to the fire. And people used to go up maybe in twos, and you could go down in your grubbage in front of the fire and have a little chat there, safe in the knowledge that you were free from answering questions in the class for the duration of that time. So the school hadn't changed. It was still in existence up to 1972, when the last students finished here and they moved into Kinvara. Now, the teacher who was here at the end was Mr. Joe Muldoon, and I think Margaret O'Shaughnessy was the teacher that was with them when they moved from here into the school. Now, it could be Grania Byrne, but I'm not sure. But they moved into St. Joseph's School, and this place ceased to be a school. When we were at school here, this was our playground. And as you can see, It's very, very short of clay. So we were actually playing on kind of exposed rocks. And down here was an open air, or an open toilet. Not the most hygienic place in the world. But you know, at the time in the 1950s, we didn't know any better, so we weren't worried too much. And in the summertime, because hardly anybody wore shoes in the summertime, we played out here with fellas had cormogs, what we call cormogs, which were branches of trees with lumps at the end of them. You played hurling with that, or with hurleys, bits of hurleys that we got at matches that were broken off and stuff. So we must have looked a very motley group. So this is Kinvara National School, a much more historic place than you thought. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll meet again at programme number 5 on Hidden Kinvara.